Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. My name is Carrie Drinkwine, and today I'm going to talk to you about best water practices. My personal background for education is I'm a traditional naturopath and a certified regenerative health practitioner. I'm the owner of Wise Wellness Clinic, as well as the Institute of Regenerative Health. If you are watching this video, it's because you are being educated on molecular hydrogen water and proper water practices. And I am on the board of science and medicine for LumiVitae. With that said, I want to break up some of the narrative that happens in the water industry and some of the common beliefs of what's good and what's bad for us. Now, when understanding water, it's important to also understand our own internal terrain and our own internal varying pHs that we have throughout the body. So pH means potential for hydrogen, and we have varying pHs throughout the entire body. From our saliva is actually quite alkaline to our gut is quite acidic. So there are three waters that are very popular in the water industry that I actually do not suggest. And I want to explain scientifically why. Number one is alkaline water. The reason I do not suggest alkaline water is because the pH is far too high for our gut. Our gut actually needs to be between a 1.8 and a 2.4 pH for optimal digestion, protein breakdown, bacterial and fungi resistance, and a plethora of other things like the action of peristalsis and contractions of the stomach, as well as our resistance to antigens and pathogens. When we are inviting in a pH of water that is way too alkaline, we're actually diluting the stomach acid in the body. And when we interfere or alter the acid pH in the gut, we start to interfere with a multitude of digestive processes. So I wanted to share this document with you. And this is really important to understand that we have varying pH throughout the body. Our saliva is more on the alkaline side if you're looking at the biochemical view. Between a 6.5 to a 7.5, we actually have an enzyme called ptyalin in our saliva that helps break down things like glucose and fructose and galactose. This is a very important part of our actual overall digestive process, which is why it's really, really important to chew your food. After the salivary enzymes have gone to work, you swallow the food and it actually drops into the stomach. Now, the upper stomach does have a little bit of a higher pH, meaning 4.0 to 6.5. 4 is more the ideal range. And when you get into the lower region of the stomach, where the gastric glands are located, you're in these lower pHs of 1.5 to 2.8. Now, this part is really, really important to understand. So the gastric glands are producing hydrochloric acid, and this is what's breaking down complex proteins. It's aiding in further digestion. It's actually signaling the pancreas for some more enzymatic support. It's also converting pepsin to pepsinogen to start to break down those more complex foods and creates an overall resistance to pathogens and antigens. Once the stomach has completed this process, it's very important that this is an acidic pH in order to actually break down the food properly and to break it down on an enzymatic level. This pH must be acidic in order for the next step to happen. I essentially call this stomach area the pre-digestion phase, where the lower portion of the stomach is secreting hydrochloric acid and pepsin until it reaches its optimal pH, which really is between 1.5 and 2.8. Now, after the food mixes with all of these digestive juices, it then will enter the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. And this is where the pH begins to change. However, it really is important that we've had the opportunity to digest in this very acid pH before it enters the duodenum, because the pH is part of the signaling and the communication. There's actually something called secretin that is secreted from your cells, and it's secreted by the duodenum in response to hydrogen positive ions as well as fatty acids. Now, what's really important to understand is that this pH must be less than a 4 in order for the arrival of gastric contents. Now, what's really important to understand is that in order for this secretin to be released or initiation of release, is that the arrival of gastric contents needs to come in with a pH that is less than 4, which is why it's so important to have that acid pH in the gut and not to be neutralizing or raising the pH with alkaline water. Now, the secretin starts to neutralize the pH in the duodenum, and it essentially is optimizing the function of the pancreas, which is a very important enzymatic process to properly break down food into vital and usable nutrients for absorption. When secretin neutralizes the pH in the duodenum, it also helps the pancreas secrete things like amylase and lipase. And in the duodenum, the pancreas also produces something called sodium bicarbonate that it releases to help neutralize some of these acids to carry out this enzymatic process. So if our pH is off in the body, we actually can paralyze the release of secretin as well as sodium bicarbonate, which will lead to symptoms of gas and bloating. And then from there, poor nutrient absorption or uptake, brain fog, fatigue, and beyond. One other thing to take note of in sodium bicarbonate is that it actually is also a digestive aid. It helps break down certain enzymes in the body as well. So you don't want to have a high level of sodium bicarbonate or too low. It's very important that we honor these pHs so that each step of digestion can happen. Now, after this holding tank, so you chew your food, it goes into the esophagus, then it goes into the stomach where we have this very acid pH, hydrochloric acid, pepsin to pepsinogen conversion. Then it's dropped into the duodenum where the pH begins to change because of the arrival of a more acid pH. This starts to trigger the secretin to be released. Once that is released, then we start to activate sodium bicarbonate, insulin, amylase, lipase from the pancreas to really further the enzymatic breakdown of your food so that you have usable nutrients to take up and absorb in the intestines, which is the next step. The small intestine, the pH varies throughout the intestine, and the small intestine is a very important piece. You have 15 to 20 feet that is filled with thousands of different microvilli. These microvilli are what are absorbing and uptaking nutrients. Now, food can stay in the intestine for an hour to up to 5 hours, depending on how slow your absorption or your digestive breakdown power is. In the large intestine, we start to see the pH start to change as well. And this is really where the body is reabsorbing any excess water out of your food or minerals that were not properly utilized and starts to uptake excess sodium, minerals, and hydration. So with that said, I hope you understand the basic process of digestion, and this is part of why we do not recommend alkaline water. Now, there's two other water types that I don't recommend, and one is reverse osmosis and the other is distilled. Now, this is technically taught to be the cleanest water, and the water is essentially clean. But the process of reverse osmosis is a several-tiered process that actually removes all contaminants from the water. It removes bacteria, heavy metals, pesticides. So it sounds great, right? But through this series of removing this, we also strip the water of its life and its structure, and it's essentially dead water. And we really want living water that has all of its mineralization in the body in order to hold an electrical charge. Now, next up, distillation is very similar to reverse osmosis, but a different process. The outcome is essentially the same. You are getting water that is clean, water that does not have bacteria or viruses, but again, it's dead water, and usually the pH of both RO and distilled is 7 or higher. Distilled water goes through a process of boiling, and it essentially results in a steam. That steam is then compressed and reduced back down into a liquid. So essentially what happens is all the contaminants are left behind in a boiling chamber, but the water afterwards is essentially dead or flat water. So in the next video, I will discuss best water practices, but these are the waters that we choose to avoid, especially when wanting to produce the most therapeutic water for the human body.